Chuo Kikuu ya Western Kentucky anakuletea hotuba na mazungumzo. Mgeni leo ni Bwana Richard Leakey, mtaalamu mkuu wa udaji wa mwanadamu, na tena yeye ni mkurugenzi ya National Museums wa Kenya. Pamoja naye ni Bi Frances Cope, mwanafunzi hapa na anasoma udaji ya mwanadamu, yani anthropology. Bwana Paul Rono, mkalenjini kutoka Kenya, ambaye anasoma jiografia hapa. Na ya mwisho ni mwalimu mkuu Bwana Schocke, ambaye anafundisha shuleni hapa.
Mr. Leakey, in 1972, you found a very early man-like skull dated about 3 million years ago by the potassium argon technique. This particular skull has a very large cranial capacity for that time period and has a number of major important significances. Would you care to give us a little background of how you found this and how it fits into your ideas of the evolutionary perspective?
Well, the discovery was made by one of my colleagues, a man by the name of Bernard Ngenyeo, who's a Kenyan. The discovery was not exactly chance. He was out looking for fragments of fossil man. He observed a number of pieces that were washing out onto the surface. He identified these as being fragments of a cranium. Subsequently, a period of about 8 weeks was spent examining the site, excavating, and a total of about 250 pieces were collected. These were carefully restored, and we ended up with a skull that was essentially complete, lacking the teeth, but, as you mentioned, it had sufficient preserve to give us some idea of the cranial capacity. And the thing that is clear is it had a capacity of just under 800 cubic centimeters. Now, at the time of the discovery, we weren't sure of the precise age. We felt it would date between 2.5 and 3 million years, and in the last few years, further work has been done on this, and it's now clear that the age of the specimen is 3 million years. The significance of this is that up until the point it was discovered, it was thought that if man had a large brain, this was the product of the last million years at the most. And one took Homo erectus as a stage before man, modern man, and it was assumed that we went from that stage to modern man stage within the last million years. To find this back at 3 million years throws into doubt some of the discussions about the ape man of Africa, the creature known as Australopithecus to scientists. This had a much smaller brain and was held to have been our ancestor within the last 2 million years. If you have a more intelligent form back at 3, it questions whether Australopithecus was ever our ancestor, and I personally don't believe he was.
We also have a reconstruction which somebody made of what they thought 1470 man would look like. And Marie, just prefer to have your comments on what you disagree or might agree, if anything, about the reconstruction.
Well, I don't think there's anything I could say that would be convenient. I believe it takes an artist to criticize an artist's work. I deal with facts and bones and skulls, not fleshed out models. This was done without my knowledge, it was done without my authority, and I don't think it necessarily bears any resemblance to what the creature might have looked like in the flesh, as it were. Even if it had looked like this, I wouldn't know, because my business is to deal with the bones, not the restoration of flesh upon those bones. So I think it's an intriguing thing. I think it's perfectly hideous, personally, from a purely personal standpoint. But I think often students like to know what these skulls would look like if they had flesh on, and I think some better work has been done by other people. And I don't think that's a particularly good example of what we're talking about.
Well, Australopithecus africanus and Australopithecus robustus, some people say are two different species. Do you think they are two different species, or it's the male and female of one species?
I think they're two different species. I have been on record as saying that I thought the small africanus should be re-examined because in the past 30 years, a lot of small Australopithecines were classified to Africanus merely because they were small. Now, surely a female robustus tends to be smaller than a male robustus, and this was well demonstrated as a result of our work in Kenya. But I think in addition to there being males and females of robustus, as it's called, there's also very good evidence for a much smaller species of Australopithecus, which they call africanus, that had a small brain and small teeth, and is known from the southern part of Africa, as well as from Kenya and Tanzania, and also from Ethiopia now.
I had understood that you differed with your father on that. Do you now agree with him?
Well, I differ with a lot of people at different times. I'm one of those scientists who changes their position as new evidence comes to light. I have never said I didn't believe in Australopithecus africanus. I merely said the evidence for it was not conclusive in East Africa. And being a Kenyan, I have not had the opportunity to work in South Africa. I have never had a first-hand examination of their material. But I merely suggested that at that time, the classification of early man on the basis was a mistake, and that we could be easily misled. I think now it is quite clear that in East Africa we do have a small form of Australopithecus as well as a large form, as well as Homo.
I have a question about the first man to appear on Earth. So scientists believe that probably it is either must have been Asia or Africa. What theory do you have, or what facts have you proved about the first man on Earth?
Well, I don't think you can ever say the first man.
Yeah.
What I think we're talking about is the earliest evidence that is available at any particular point in time. Now, as of today, the scientific evidence indicates that the earliest evidence that is available to us is from Africa at 14 million years, at a place called Fort Turner near Kisumu in Kenya. At about 12 million years, there's also evidence from Asia, and both of these forms are known as Ramapithecus. Then there's very little evidence from Asia until you get to about 2 million years ago. But in Africa, there's quite considerable evidence between 14 and 2, in the sense of specimens from Rudolph, specimens from Olduvai, specimens from the Omo, specimens from Ethiopia. So I think one can say that the bulk of the evidence points to Africa as being the home of man. I don't think it's impossible that earlier stages of man will be found in Asia and southern Europe. And I don't think one can ever say this is the first or this is the last. I think one's talking about a sense of where things were happening. And also I think it would be wrong to assume that man began at Lake Rudolph or man began in Tanzania. I think we're talking about Africa on a Pan-African basis. It happens that in Kenya and Tanzania and Ethiopia, there are places where you can find this. And I think interestingly enough, the Organization for African Unity, based in Addis Ababa, has agreed on the recommendations of Kenya that the Lagos Festival later this year on black arts and African culture will take early man on a continental basis rather than on a national basis. And we will put evidence there that has come from Kenya. We will not say it's from Kenya, we'll merely say it's evidence of early man from Africa.
Why did you choose particularly the two main places you mentioned that you have been working at Lake Rudolph and Olduvai Gorge? Why did you not even work at Lake Victoria as well? Because I understand that in the early days, people moved along the the River Nile, and some settled around Lake Victoria. Why did you not choose the Lake Victoria as your basis of studies, and you happen to choose the two places mainly, Olduvai and Rudolph?
Well, I didn't choose Olduvai. My parents went there in 1930. The reason they went there is that important finds had been made, archaeological evidence that man had lived there. It was a question of locating further evidence, and it was a very rich locality with a lot of opportunity. As far as Lake Rudolph is concerned, the reason I went there is that it was a very large area of unexplored country. In terms of paleontology, it looked as if it had great promise. Other expeditions have worked at Lake Victoria, and some expeditions I've been associated with. I think what one has to remember is that the media, the television, the radio, the newspapers, talk about things that are spectacular. They seldom talk about 95% of the activities of a particular organization. And in Kenya, we have a very extensive program throughout Kenya with archaeological investigations, not just around Lake Victoria or Lake Rudolph, but in many places, and there are many scientists now working on this, including our own scientists.
How many people do you take out on your crew when you go out on a dig?
Well, the Rudolph expedition is an interdisciplinary, international project involving Kenyans, Europeans, British, and North Americans. Last year, we had a total of 35 scientists and a further 50 personnel working on the project. A total of over 80 people for 6 months of the year working at Lake Rudolph.
And how do you get funded for a tremendous crew like that?
Well, the Kenya government, through the National Museum, supplies about 20% of the budget. In fact, the Kenya government covers all the Kenyan involvement in terms of salaries. The National Geographic Society of the United States gives us support. The National Science Foundation of the United States gives support to the American component of this expedition. The National Environmental Research Council, the Royal Society of Great Britain give money to their scientists. So it is really a corporate body with support coming from the world community. But the way you get money is you ask for it.
That seems like the best idea.
It's Ngeno, Bernard Ngeno, is he your co-worker or another independent person?
No, Bernard Ngeno is part of a team. The Rudolph Research Project, I lead. It has two other directors or leaders on it. One is Dr. Isaac, who's a British anthropologist who works at California. And the other one is Kamoya Kemeo, who's a Kenyan, who's concerned with the paleontological side. Now, the three of us head up this program. Bernard Ngeno is a young Kenyan with no high school education, but he's had on-the-job training and experience for the last 10 years, and his anatomical knowledge, not just of man, but of all the vertebrates, is extraordinarily good. And he is a part of a team of 7 people who work under Kamoya on the business of seeking out evidence of fossils.
Why were the names given, like Anthropologist, Nutcrackerman, and so on? Why did you name those names, not other names? Did you base your studies on the past events, I mean, studies in Europe, or?
No, in science, if you're going to name something as either at the species level or the genus level, first of all, you have to establish that you're not talking about something that's already been named. If you establish that you're dealing with a new genetic group, and you decide that it merits separation at a generic level, it's rather like, for example, if you were going to give a name to forks on a table, forks that you eat with, you'd say these are all forks. That would be the genus. And then the species of forks would be your table fork, your strawberry fork, and your other forks. These would all be the species. Now, Australopithecus was a name given to a type of early man by scientists in 1924. And all it means, it's a Latin word saying southern ape-man, Africanus of Africa. Now, once a name has been given to a genus, we're stuck with it. We can't change it. It's a permanent, indelible name for this group. We haven't named anything at Lake Rudolph because I think we should have more evidence before we go making new names. Nutcracker man, as you call it, is a figment of the imagination of the press.
I see.
You mentioned your family worked down in Olduvai Gorge. You have a very famous family, and I wondered what they're doing now.
Well, my mother is still working at the Olduvai Gorge. As you know, my father passed away in 1972. I have 3 brothers, one of whom is a botanist in Cambridge, England, the university. Another brother who's in Kenya, he's a herpetologist studying reptiles. And the youngest brother is, he has no long-term activity, but he recently ran for national election in Kenya, but didn't win, but came a close second.
Oh, that's good to hear.
You ran national election simply because he's a citizen, is that correct?
Not simply because he's a citizen, because he's a concerned citizen and wanted to have something to do with the leadership of the country.
But what region did he actually come from? Because members are voted according to particular areas, let's say constituencies.
Well, he stood in the constituency of Langata. Langata is a suburb of Nairobi. the electorate tends to be people who come in to work to the city. There are very few what we would call expatriates in Kenya who would vote. And his voting was almost entirely from the Wananchi, as we call them, the people, the indigenous people, who were in the area.
What position did he get? Because it's interesting to know.
Well, he contested in a seat where there were 11 people in one party for the same seat, including the incumbent. He came a very close second. I think the winner got 5,000 votes, and he got 4,000 and some hundred.
I think in the next coming election he might win because he's very close. It sounds very close. Maybe he will convert or get out of other people to vote for him, and he might.
Well,
what is his intention when he gets to the parliament?
I think you'd have to ask him. I work for the government, and we don't normally, as you know, being a Kenyan, talk about such matters.
Yeah, I know. Anyway, I don't want to.
You're very diplomatic.
Yeah, that's true.
And with that, you like your pipe, I notice.
How did you become the director of the National Museum?
Well, at the end of 1968, the Kenya government felt that the museum needed to get a Kenyan identity. It had been run since independence by a British scientist who was very British in many respects, and the government felt that it should be taken over by a Kenyan, and I was the only Kenyan who had even slight qualifications to do this. Certainly my qualifications were not very good, but I learned the job and took the job on late 68 and still have it today.
What are your major responsibilities in terms of that job?
Well, the museum is very large by African standards. It's probably the largest museum in Africa. It's a natural history museum or biological museum with a strong cultural, historical activity. We're responsible for all antiquities in the Republic of Kenya. I have a staff of about 250 individuals. We have two major areas of interest. We're concerned with science and research, and we're concerned with national education. In terms of education, we're concerned with the curricular development in school, both at primary and secondary level. We're concerned with university and the provision of people to give courses for undergraduate work. We're concerned with the production of booklets and pamphlets that are used in schools. We have an extension program through a series of clubs known as the Wildlife Clubs of Kenya, which are like your 4-H clubs in the United States, which has a membership now of 15,000. And we also have exhibits for educational purposes, not just in the capital city of Nairobi, but we have 5 other museums now in different parts where we have small exhibits dealing with some of the issues of national importance. Then on the research, we have large collections of biological material that are reference value to scientists. Of course, we have the fossil man collections, which are unique in the world. We have got collections of other fossil creatures, entomological, ornithological, that's birds, insects, mammals. And then, of course, we have a large historical component to this museum as well. And my main activity is trying to keep this whole thing together, plus my international interests.
I would like to ask you again the future of anthropologists in Kenya, and about also the natives particularly, because you said that some of the people who work with you at Lake Ruto or other places are international people, I mean Europeans or Americans. What do you think of the natives, the future of the natives according to anthropologists?
Well, I think the policy of Kenya is very clear on this matter. I think the present government has made this abundantly clear. We would like to see nationals of our country involved wherever it is possible for them to be involved. There are several openings that will be filled by Kenyans in the field of archaeology, paleontology, and physical anthropology within the next 2 years, and we have Kenyans completing their PhD work at the moment. Once that has been established, one then has to think, if you train up more PhD paleontologists, where are they going to get work? There's not the money in Kenya to employ these professional people. And I think what we're aiming towards at the moment in Kenya is to give people a professional background in this science, so that while doing another job, perhaps, let us say, a lecturer at the university in zoology, or a botanical research fellow at the university, or somebody who's teaching somewhere, they could have their own research interests. There's plenty of research opportunity and I don't think there's any limit to the amount of good caliber men and women that Kenya needs. The problem, of course, is finance. It's extremely difficult to get money, and I think we in Kenya must recognize that it's more important at the moment to spend our people's money on medicine, on food, and on education than it is on studying the past. And so the Kenyans will have to always grow according to the availability of research funds in an area that is somewhat esoteric in terms of national development.
I think that's clear.
Recently, there's been a skeleton called, just referred to as Lucy, about 3 million years old. I'm not really very familiar with it at all. In fact, I'd really like to find out what you feel the relationship with that particular skeleton is regarding, say, 1470 man.
Well, Lucy is a name that was given to a discovery of a partial skeleton that was found in Ethiopia, dating at 3 million. It was found by a man by the name of Dr. Johansen and his colleague Maurice Payet. I think it ranks as one of the more important discoveries that have been made in the last decade. Its actual significance would be hard to talk about in view of the fact that Dr. Johansen hasn't yet made a scientific statement. Previous to the present time, if a scientist made an important discovery, he tended to keep it to himself. He never shared it with his colleagues. This has changed in that Dr. Hansen and I and others working in the field are now sharing our data prior to publication, and the price that we pay for this privilege is that we don't talk about each other's discoveries until the person who made them has had a chance to state his position vis-a-vis what they mean. I would go so far as to say that 1470 and Lucy are different things. They are of about the same age or time equivalent, but they are not the same ballgame.
One of the big voids, time-wise, in terms of skeletal material, tends to be really a bit earlier than that, up to, say, around Pithecus. Where would you think would be one of the better areas, well, if you had a decent area you're going to look for material from this time gap, where would you go to?
Well, I think there's several sites in Kenya that still need to be worked. I think there's sites in Uganda that need to be worked. I think there's sites undoubtedly in Ethiopia that have not been worked and should be worked at a similar time period. I wouldn't be at all surprised if we didn't find something quite intriguing in the Middle East area, particularly in the Iran, Persian Gulf, because this would be an area where man would have moved through in his migrations between India and Africa, and there's some very rich deposits to be worked there. But I think the world has more to hear from Kenya on this story as we pursue our own investigations over the next 10 years.
There is a theory that at one time there were 20 million Ramapithecines walking over the continent. Actually, all they have found are 2 jaws and about 10 teeth. How can they make such a theory from such a small find?
I don't know who would make such a theory. As far as our side is concerned, the scientists working through the National Museum of Kenya, we've only talked about what has been found. We've never proposed any theories on what these might represent in terms of populations.
Or how many there might be.
No way you could do that. If such a theory has been proposed seriously, it is quite preposterous.
In Fort Turner in Kenya, you found some crushed bones and some tools made of rocks, and you thought perhaps Ramapithecus did use tools and that he is a hominid.
No. What was found was
There shoots my theory.
found by my father, and it consisted of several antelope skulls
Right.
that had been hit the back of the head. There were depressed fractures, and on the same level there was found a stone that was
Yes.
exactly the same size as the depression on these skulls.
And what did he decide?
He also found a piece of a lower jaw and 2 pieces of upper jaw of a creature that he felt was not an ape, but was probably man.
Yes.
He went so far as to suggest that it was conceivable that this artifact had been used by Kenyapithecus. But there's no conclusive evidence. Indeed, the evidence for Kenyapithecus or Ramapithecus, as you say, is a few jaws and teeth. It is so fragmentary that one really couldn't hang a hat on it. And I, for one, having seen the difficulty we got into in the later period on jaws and teeth, have the inclination to be a little cautious about getting too stirred up about the 14 million year period at the moment, But I feel sufficiently optimistic that there is a potential that further work will be done.
In other words, you'd basically go along with Simon's statement that at the moment, Ramapithecus can be referred to as at least a dental hominid.
We only have dental remains, so
Right,
it could
right.
only be a dental hominid.
Right.
And I think some of the artist illustrations that are drawn, sort of thing like you showed me at the beginning of this
Yeah,
program,
weird things
are
like that.
totally preposterous and have no significance or meaning whatsoever in place in science. And I think it's those sort of things that get us such a bad reputation in certain circles.
Right, well, it's fairly similar to just the Neanderthal man, which is only recently they find out the type specimen was an old man with arthritis and whatever else on there.
Neanderthal is modern man. There's nothing particular
Right.
about Neanderthal as
Right.
far as I'm concerned, but
Well,
a
yeah.
great deal was made out of it in the early stage. But I think the important thing that has emerged in the last few years is that the study of early man has become science. It started out as an art. We now have sufficient material that we can begin to take a statistical view. We can start talking about population variation. We can start talking about some of the genetical issues that are concerned. And for the first time, I think we're becoming scientific about what we're doing. We're consulting with other scientists. 10 years ago, this wasn't being done.
Yeah, speaking of population variation brings back to my mind, 1470 man, from the standpoint of, well, you know the approximate cranial capacity, but one of the problems on there is you really don't know whether it's a typical individual or one range or the other of the population variability on it.
If we only had the one, you're right. But we have several jaws. We have parts now of 3 different skulls.
3?
We have several limb bones and other parts of the body that are not yet published. From Rudolph, there's now new material from Tanzania that came out in the last few months that hasn't been published, and there's some material from Ethiopia that hasn't been published. And I think one is no longer talking on the basis of one specimen. And indeed, at the time 1470 was announced, we were talking about a second skull, 1590, of similar antiquity, plus 2 limb bones. But of course, it was less exciting than one skull, so that the popular ideas based themselves on one specimen. And a lot of my colleagues attempted to take me to task on doing it on one specimen, and I said if they'd take the time to read some of the scientific literature and discuss what I said in that, as opposed to what some journalist had said he thought he heard me say, we could discuss things.
Yeah, well, this is a common problem in terms of anything of that nature.
Surely.
If you read the scientific account and read what happened in the field, maybe you may not even recognize that you were there.
That's absolutely right. And I feel perfectly prepared to be taken to task on things that I say, either scientifically or publicly. But I do feel it's unfortunate to be taken to task on things that somebody thinks you said publicly or popularly.
Mazungumzo hii ni kutoka televisheni ya chuo kikuu ya Western Kentucky.